we find ourselves this week in the midst of plagues. In the Torah, we're in the middle of Parashat Bo, the third portion of Exodus, which covers plagues 3 through 10, locusts through the killing of the firstborn. Also, important to note, the rules of observing Passover. Do you know what the number one most celebrated holiday, Jewish holiday, is in America? It's Passover, right? It's the best holiday. Mostly, the rules are about matzah, right? You have to eat it. Don't have any leaven in your house. Don't have any leaven in your whole territory, which for me, I assume means Lower Merion Township. It's even called the Feast of Matzah, as if anyone has ever feasted on matzah. It's really easy to think that matzah is, in fact, the point of Passover. You're supposed to clean your house of all the leaven. You sell off your chametz to a neighbor for $1 that you buy back later. You change your dishes so that the matzah stays on the matzah plates. You have to have matzah ball soup. I have to have matzah ball soup. I don't know about you. You have to have matzah brai because what else are you going to eat for breakfast? In fact, if you read almost any kid's book about Passover, you know it is only about matzah, right? They all talk about matzah. My son's favorite book right now is a book about a kid who loves matzah so much, and every day of Passover is a new kind of matzah until the last day, when she doesn't want to eat matzah anymore and she misses out on Grandpa's famous matzah brai. It's all matzah. Except that, of course, the point is not matzah, almost in any way. The big commandment really shows up in this portion, chapter 13, verse 8. And you shall explain to your child on that day, it is because of what the Eternal did for me when I went free from Egypt. It's a storytelling holiday. The biggest part of the Seder, the most crucial part of the Seder, is the Magid, the retelling of the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Not only that, but you have to retell it to your children. And not only that, you have to be good at it. It says that you have to be so good that kids are engaged. Even if you have to remove the table, you have to do something to get them engaged in the story, asking why. We even have a book, so in case you don't remember how the story goes, you can read it. There is no book that we read on Hanukkah to remind us of the Hanukkah story, except for, again, every children's book in existence about Hanukkah, which only talks about the story. It's our story, right? And naturally, we come out looking great. There's the evil Pharaoh, there's Pharaoh's evil army, they get punished, they get drowned. Except that, if you read this story, particularly this week's portion, it turns out Pharaoh is not the bad guy. If I may be so bold, God is the bad guy. I'm not even referring to the plagues, which many people point out, and even our tradition teaches, we are not to take joy in the drowning of Pharaoh's army, that even the angels wept for God's people to be lost. And the plagues also, not something we're supposed to take joy in, merely necessary. But why is God the evil villain? Because God hardens Pharaoh's heart over and over and over again. It says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart and therefore he would not let the Israelites go. Even as a kid, I heard this part and I was like, wait, what? That seems kind of unfair. Although, in fairness, I did not know how to articulate that till cantorial school, I guess. But it's not fair. Pharaoh keeps letting them go, then changing his mind, then letting them go, then changing his mind, reworking the deal over and over again. But it's not because he was shifty. It's not because he was the evil villain. It's because God hardened Pharaoh's heart. He was a dupe. Why did God harden Pharaoh's heart? Because it says it was to show the miracles and wonders to the Israelites. Pharaoh had to resist God's word and God's order in order for the whole plan to work. Israelites needed inspiration. They'd been slaves in Egypt for 400 years. They didn't know God anymore. They didn't know God's name. When Moses says, when I tell the Israelites you're coming, who shall I say is coming? And God's like, well, I've got a couple of different names I've gone by. Do you know anyone who's gone by a couple of different names in their lifetime? I'm saying that's not normal, right? We don't always know what's going on in other people's heads. And in truth, the less we like a person and the less we agree with them, the less likely we are to really even care what's going on in their heads. We just tell a story in our own. We tell a story. We tell a story to ourselves, to our friends, our family, our children. We tell a story about being wronged or being saved. A story about moving to a new place, of leaving behind a terrible situation, of a long journey where we don't know the end. But we don't always try to acknowledge the other side of the story. Sometimes it's complicated. Sometimes we don't know. One of the things that I enjoy doing from time to time is writing a Purim spiel, retelling that good old book of Esther. And you know, Haman, boo, thank you, is clearly the evil villain. But we don't really know Haman's backstory. We just know who his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was, king of the Amalekites. Therefore, we write him off. And sure enough, he shows us his true colors. He's not a nice guy. But we don't know what happened to him before the story begins. We don't know what turned him into an evil guy. Here we know what turned Pharaoh into our evil villain. And it wasn't his fault. And I, for the record, think this is unfair. When we go through a difficult time and we come out on the other side and we tell a story about that time, it's sometimes a recognition, that moment when we're able to tell a story, that we needed that difficult time, that we needed it to show us what blessings we really have, what we are capable of in difficult times, who our people are. After the killing of the firstborn in this week's portion, Pharaoh sends Moses and the Israelites away one final time. And there's a line there right at the end of his command that struck me. The very last thing he says as they run away, he says, "And may you bring a blessing upon me also." That is so strange. You enslave a people for 400 years. You refuse to let them go, and on their way out the door as they escape, you go, "Hold on, could I have a parting gift, please?" Maybe that was Pharaoh's way of saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't have much choice in the matter. I was trapped, and basically it was your God's fault, not mine. So the least you can do for me as you rob my people of their gold and silver is leave me with a blessing." What a weird idea, that we'd even have a blessing for our enemies. We'd have a blessing for the people we blame for our hardships. That we have a blessing for our own difficult times and the people who had a starring role in them. I'm not saying that we have to forgive. And I'm not saying that we have to forget. But I am saying that we need to be aware of the stories that we tell. And we need to be aware of their power to shape how we understand our world. The stories we tell, the way that we tell them, how we understand the journeys of our life, that is what our children will learn from us. Shabbat Shalom.